again. Welcome to part 4 of my talk as a national serviceman in the Rhodesian Army. This is the beginning of what I hope to be a series of talks and interviews that I will be doing with other men and women who served in the Rhodesian security forces. In part 3, I ended off where I'd had a self-imposed punch-up with the Zambian army at Kazangula, and a while later, having been posted back for independent company in Victoria Falls, there was a shuffle of the troops that were there in the village. I think we had intake 155 come in to replace us, and I, with all of my guys in my platoon, were transferred to one independent company under Don Price, which was based up at Binga, on the shores of Lake Kariba. I remember going up there in the truck and looking at a very somber face of my dear friend Dave Kruger. He looked very quiet on that trip, and unfortunately him and 2 other guys were killed when we had been transferred to one independent company. That was terribly sad for me, because I really enjoyed those guys, and I give due respect and honour to those guys. There are 3 of them: Roy Orchard, Tom Shipley, and Dave Kruger, and a couple of other guys were badly injured. And I believe that was in the Viridona or Matusadona mountains around Binga. I was up there for only 2 nights, I think it was, with Don Price in one independent company, and then he told me that I was off back to Victoria Falls for some R&R, rest and recuperation, which was great. Going to see my girlfriend again. I couldn't wait. I flew back in a little Pro aircraft, or some little military one-engine noddy plane, and almost puked myself to death going back there. I think it flew to Wankie, and then I caught another truck up to Vic Falls. But that flight was really rough. We were hitting our heads on the roof and flying all over the place. I've never experienced such updrafts in my life. Anyway, back at Vic Falls, I ensconced myself in my girlfriend's house in one of the crescents. She had a house because she was an employee of the casino hotel, and she went off to work one evening, and at about 10 o'clock at night, I was lying there listening to Spin Out, I think it was, with Jeremy Wilmot from down in Durban or some other part of the world. And around about 10 o'clock at night, just as I was dozing off listening to the music, the room I was lying in, which was in semi-darkness, just started to flash at the windows, and I looked up and I thought, geez, are we going to get some rain? And then these big bangs echoed down the valley, and another bang, and then that familiar sound of automatic weapons being fired. And I ran over to the window, and I looked out the window, and I could just see tracer going up into the sky. It was green tracer, which indicated it was of terrorist or Russian or Chinese origin. And immediately my heart started beating like crazy, and I ran to the back door. My next door neighbor was a guy called Fricky. I won't give you his surname because he might still be living in Zimbabwe, although I think he's passed on now. But we looked at each other and we said, "Hell, that's Elephant Hills. Elephant Hills Hotel has been stonked." And so he said, "Listen, I'm a police reservist. I've got to go down to the station and report." So I said, "Well, give me 2 minutes and I'll come with you." So I ran back inside, got my uniform, got my rifle. In those days, we always took our rifle home with us on R&R. Got my ammo and stuff like that. I got in these little car and zoomed off down to the police station. And all the while there were thuds and crashes and the sound of ripping automatic fire going off in the night. I got to the police station. There was a hive of activity going on there. The inspector came out and addressed about 12 of us. There were some hunters, guys that had come in from the hunting commissions around the area, whatever you want to call them. They were there with their civilian rifles and scopes, and we had a few policemen with their Uzis and maybe the odd FN and that type of thing. And I pitched up with Ricky. I don't think he had a weapon, actually. I think, now that I'm talking about it, I didn't have any chest webbing. I only had my rifle and 20 rounds of ammo. Anyway, the police inspector said, listen, I'm going to send some of you guys to guard the other hotels, and I want some volunteers to get on the speedboat that we have down at the jetty. That's where the booze cruise took off from. Just to the east of that was a police boat jetty. There was 2 boats, I think. But anyway, we were given a Browning machine gun and 2 boxes of ammo. And this is where the joke came in. It was really funny. I mean, we got in a little R4 Renault, the grey type that the police used, and there we went off in our little noddy car down to the police jetty. I mean, there was an attack going on at Elephant Hills, and we had to go right up to the junction of the turnoff up to Elephant Hills, or even beyond there, to get to our destination. We could have driven straight into the gooks. 4 of us in this little car. I had my rifle sticking out the window. The other guys had a rifle on the right hand side. And that's it. We got down to the jetty. Now the boat had a very powerful push-pull engine, and I don't know what size the boat was, 12, 14, 15 feet, something like that. And mounted on the one side towards the middle of the boat was a pole, and in that I slotted the shank of the 303. And I'd had some basic sort of experience on a 303 Browning, and so they put me on the gun as the gunner. Now, the reason why we'd been put on the river is that quite often terrorists rode across from Zambia and they did their dirty deeds, and then they rode back again. So this was in the days before the minefields had been built around Victoria Falls, and they would come over and they would do their dirty deeds, kill and maim people, and scoot back in canoes or dinghies or whatever back to Zambia. And so the plan was to try and intercept them before they got back to Zambia. So anyway, we left the police jetty. The boat had a very powerful push-pull engine, that sort of type like a jet engine. It didn't have propellers at the back. It sucked the water into it and jettisoned it out the back, and it was hell of a fast. And I remember we turned left or west from the jetty, went upriver a little bit, and then we went down the northern bank of the big island in front of the Zambia Hotel, and then we headed east towards the falls. The water was going at a hell of a rate, and over on the right as we went along on the river was the Elephant Hills Hotel, all lit up like you can't believe, and the light shining up there against the black sky. And the river was going faster and faster and faster, and because we didn't know if the gooks were down by the golf course firing up at the hotel, we didn't know where they were. We didn't know where they would be launching their boats to get back to Zambia, but it would have been a stupid place to launch from where we now found ourselves, which was about a kilometer above the falls. We found that the boat was going hell of a fast at this point, so we decided to turn around. But as we did so, the power to the boat just packed in. It just conked out the engine, and we were drifting with very little power coming out of this jet wash at the back, and we managed with the butt of our FN rifles to row at an oblique angle over to a very small island with some reeds and overhead branches, which we latched onto very quickly, and we anchored ourselves there. And I tell you, when I looked over to the right, the rushing water with all the white flecks, the wavelets rushing over to the falls on this big column of spray, was bloody close. So the driver of the boat, the police guy, I forget what his name was, young blonde guy, he did the bravest thing I've ever seen. He first of all took the canopy off this motor and dug out a coil of reeds from the motor as thick as my wrist, and he tried gunning the engine, and that did nothing. So like I said, he did something very brave. He climbed over the back of the boat in the middle of the night, possibly with crocs around, and he felt under the boat, and he went under the boat and he dug out this coil of reed that had been caught up in there somehow. He eventually came up and said, "That's the best I can do." We pulled him back on board. He got dressed, and we said a quick prayer and pushed ourselves out back into the river. Then he started the motor, obviously just while we were in the reeds, but when we got out of the reeds, he really gunned the motor, and I tell you, my heart was in my mouth that night, because when he gunned the engine, nothing happened. The engine was running fine, but there was just no propulsion, and we were getting pulled over to the Devil's Gorge, or the Devil's Cataract, whatever you could call it, and we were going backwards slowly, but we were going backwards. We were losing the battle, and it was only a matter of time before we actually went over the falls. It was the most frightening thing that's ever happened to me. Anyway, by some miracle, thank you Lord, the jet wash cleared at the back, the propulsion system, and we shot upriver like a duck with its backside on fire. And we shot back up between the island and the Rhodesian mainland, and the Zambia hotel swept past on our left, and then we were going upriver, and we slowed down to speed where we could try and pick up things, boats or whatever, or dinghies on the river. It was a starlit night with a slither of moon, and as we sped along, that same reflection that I mentioned in the last video of this carpet of stars reflecting off the smooth water, it gave you that sort of weird impression that you were actually floating in space, because you had no horizon. Anyway, we were going up to a reasonably narrow point just west of the Zambia area, and the river at that point narrowed quite a bit. And I was looking at the stars on the water. Obviously, I was looking for the enemy, but I looked ahead, looked at the stars on the water, and then I noticed these little flecks bouncing around on the water. And then I thought, what the hell is that? Are the fish jumping tonight or what? And then it suddenly dawned on me that those were bullets hitting the water. And I shouted out to the guys, we've been shot at, we've been shot at. And we soon became aware of the fact that the fire wasn't coming from the Rhodesian side, it was coming from the Zambian side. And there was loads, I mean, like a whole carpet of green traces, hundreds of them just flicking past us, landing in the water. And it's quite weird. You get a sort of an optical illusion when this tracer comes towards you, and then it seems to sort of arc upwards, and we could hear the cracks in the air. The other guys, poor old Freaky didn't have a weapon other than the handgun, I think, and so he got down below water level. I don't blame him, his weapon couldn't have done anything. And the other guy with the rifle was firing, and so I said to the driver, his name was Phil, I said, bank right Phil, because the gun was fitted at the back left quarter of the boat, and it couldn't swivel right. I would have had to stand out in the water to fire it. So I said, bank right and go downstream a little bit. And as we turned, I emptied probably an entire box of ammo into the Zambian bank, which was very, very thrilling, and I really enjoyed that. And I just aimed slightly above the smudge of the horizon where the trees met the water on the other side. So I put a good bit of tracer and other ball rounds into the target area, and then we noticed that the tracer was getting even thicker as we were heading east again. So I said, Phil, we're going to get cold if we go down there, bank sharp right and go upstream again. So that's what he did. Turned right, went upstream. I learned later that we were almost taken out by some armored cars ambushing the river, because they initially, when we came past fairly slowly, thought that we were gooks trying to get back to Zambia. And I think that was the biggest criticism I had of the army, is that inter-force communications were not always the best. Anyway, we went through this wall of tracer again, and just to the west of that, round about the Hippo Creek area, there was another island jutting into the river, or a spit of land or whatever. And I said, go over there and let's see what we can look at from the island. And we went there and we anchored the boat, tied the front bow rope onto an overhanging tree, and we anchored there for a little while. And I climbed up through the tree with another guy onto the island, and we could hear loads of movement on the Zambian side. Definitely army. There were truck engines revving, people calling out to each other. They'd obviously come out in support of this crossing, and as we subsequently learned, there was a crossing. And after about 20 minutes or half an hour being there, I thought, well, what's the point of being here? We're not going to intercept anybody here. But in fact, if I'd stayed there another 10 minutes longer, we would have seen the two dinghies that were in Hippo Creek coming back towards us, and we could have wiped them out. And I regret that not happening. But anyway, I said, come on, let's saunter across the river back to our shore. So we went off in a bleak sort of angle. The current was very strong, and we went into Hippo Creek, which is a fairly prominent creek coming into the river, and about 82 meters inside this creek was a very big tree, and its branches were hanging over the water and actually touching the water. And so we pulled up just short of the tree, tied the boat onto another little branch, took the rotor arm out of the engine, and picked up the machine gun, got the rifles and the other guys out. And we'd managed to make contact with base at that point in time, the police base, and they'd got hold of, I don't know if it was 4 or it was still 4 in depth. And they sent a column out to pick us up, a column of vehicles. There was a ferret, 2 by 2.5s, 2.5s, the Unimogs, and 3 vehicles. And so we had to leave the aerial in the boat, so that when I got off the boat with the guys, we had a radio, but without an aerial it could only transmit about I don't know, a couple of 100 meters. And anyway, we were moving inland to meet up with the dirt track that ran parallel with the Zambezi River shoreline. And as we moved along, we heard rustling in the grass just over to the right of us, and some guys started shouting at us in the local language. They must have thought that we were other tours coming to the boat, and so we formed up in a little line, and I engaged them with the 303 and the other guys with the rifles, aiming fairly low. They shot back at us, and tracer went up in the air, and that set my nerves on edge. They were literally there 50 yards away from us, down by the dinghies. But anyway, they soon ran off. I don't know if they found a place to cross Hippo Creek or whatever, but they got across and they ran west. And so I thought, well, we've got hardly any ammo left. We've got no comms. I'm not buggering around here. So I walked south to the dirt road, and I could see the ferret car coming along, bouncing along the dirt road towards us. And I called to them with the radio. The message was very faint because we had no aerial, but we eventually established comms. And just as we were moving towards them, there was a massive explosion, and the ferret just went up in a hell of a bang. So it had hit a landmine, and we got a hell of a fright. We dived to the ground, and this big cloud of smoke, and I'll never forget the sound of that bang echoing down the Zambezi Valley. It just seemed to go on and on forever, like you would get from thunder. Anyway, we approached the column, and the column leader was there. His first name is Laurie. I'm not going to give you his surname because he still lives in Zimbabwe. We met up. We got the guys out of the ferret. The commander had damaged his shoulders, neck, and his head. We had to put a bandage around his neck, and he was bleeding quite a lot. So we took him back to the 2-5 that was at the back of the column and put him in the right front seat, because the left seat is the driver's seat, and I sat immediately behind him, and we turned the vehicles around. The other vehicle was behind us, and we hadn't gone 20 meters, and bang, a mine went off straight under the injured guy's backside on the right front tire. I was sitting behind him, and I just felt this massive slap across my left ear, and that was it. We'd hit a mine, and there was that usual smell of oil and water and sand that had been turned into powder from the explosion. The guy with the bandages had somehow come out of his seatbelt, and he was lying over in the grass about 20 feet away, 6 or 7 meters away. So we got off the back of the vehicle, as we'd been trained, into the tracks of the vehicle in case there were AP mines on the side of the road. And I did a circle, took a roundabout route to get to the injured guy, and I could feel there was something wrong with me. I couldn't hear out of my left ear. I was quite dizzy. I'd received a hell of a smack in my left ear, and even to this day, 40 years later, my ear is ringing. I subsequently learned that I'd lost my eardrum. But we got off the back of the vehicles, picked the guy up, and then, with my good ear, and the other guys confirmed, we could hear this kuchoo, kuchoo, kuchoo over on the Zambian side. And we thought, oh shit, we're going to get mortared now. And so we started to run further south into the bush. It was dark with, like I said, a slither of moon. And we counted 20 and then dived to the ground. And these explosions went off, and they were bloody accurate. I was amazed how accurate they were. But the rounds were landing, probably within 50 meters of us. So we kept moving in between the primary charges firing and the 20 seconds that we ran before we hit the ground. And I remember running into a Wachambiki bush. For those of you who are not familiar with the word, Wachambiki means wait a while. It's the Afrikaans word for wach is wait, a biki, wait a little while. And I got tangled up in this thing, and I literally had to these little horns hook into your skin, on these long gangly branches, and I literally had to tear my flesh off my arms to get out of there. But the mortars were very stimulating for that exercise. Anyway, after about 20 of these rounds had landed, we went in a big circular circle back north to the road again, and this guy, Laurie, who later joined the SAS, he said, we're not going to hang around here, we've got no radio. It was on the vehicle. I had no radio. He said, I'm going to run to the Zambia hotel and go and get help. So we left the other 8 to 10 guys there there were now 2 injured people. And so I said to Laurie, I'll come with you, and we set off at a pace, the 6 or 8 kilometers, whatever it was, back to the Zambia hotel. And I'll never forget when I walked into the Zambia hotel, this was about midnight or whatever, there were still people milling around the bar. They had been facing west looking at the bangs and hearing all, but they were still milling around with their drinks in their hands, and there was a person standing at reception, and the reception was sort of open air under the thatch roof. And when this African male receptionist saw us sort of emerge out of the darkness, his eyes went wide open, and his jaw dropped, because our camo is good, you know, and at night it's excellent. And we were virtually on top of him before he noticed us. Anyway, we phoned the cop camp and the police camp, and they sent a message through to the army guys at Foinda, and another couple of vehicles came out. By this time I was feeling really crap. My ear was ringing like crazy. I could taste blood at the back of my throat, and so I didn't go back out into the bush to go and get on the vehicles and bring the other guys back. And in fact, I was on R&R. I shouldn't have even been there. I was on R&R. I'd been blown up, and then eventually the vehicles came back with all the guys, and I was taken down to 4 in-depth, where I'd first started a good 14 months before, and it was decided that I would be taken down to Wankie by an Islander aircraft. So myself and the other 2 injured guys were taken up to Sprayview airstrip, and we were put on an aeroplane. I lay at the back, and I knew that my ear was basically buggered, because I couldn't hear anything out of it, and I still had that taste of blood at the back of my throat. And so that's another little event I experienced. The other guys made a good recovery. The vehicles were recovered in good time, as they were in the Rhodesian army, and fixed up. But life is strange. There I was, enjoying the fun and the sun on R&R at Vic Falls, only to volunteer to go on the river and getting blown up. And it has affected me. I mean, for about a year or so, I kept walking in circles. Every time I stood up, I walked to the right or the left and fell over. But actually that happened quite some time after ending my national service. It was not very pleasant at all. So that's another little story. The next time I come on with part 5, I'll be talking about my time spent at Victoria Falls as a civilian, which is not really boring, because, as I've said in the very beginning of this series, Victoria Falls was like an island in the middle of nowhere, up in the bush, and we got hammered by mortars and all sorts of things quite often. So I'll be sharing a little bit of that in part number 5. So thank you for listening to this, and I look forward to sharing some more with you in the near future. Thank you.
Rise, O